Hey folks, had some folks asking me when I was doing my next video, and I haven't, been playing as much Magic recently. Kind of just taking a break from it. But anyways, the deck you have in front of you that I'm actually going to be covering today in the Canadian Highlander format is Azorious Miracles. It's actually a deck that I've covered historically as well, but I kind of want to go back through it because I think there's some interesting things that have happened in the metagame that kind of change up the feasibility, and then also how you have to build this deck given some of the considerations you have to make for the deck possibilities and also some of the popular decks that are out there right now. And I guess to stop beating around the bush on that, like, what do I mean? I mean, like the lands decks, like the strip mine recursion decks, the grindy kind of mid range decks that have the ability to attack your mana base. Whereas that's not really an axis this deck can generally effectively attack along or fight against, due to the fact that it generally, in general builds tends to lack extensive amounts of pressure. It's more answers and just the best means of pressure. Requires a lot of mana resources and does not really have a good incremental board plan. Generally tends to have a large plan, like a card advantage plan for the board, to glue like Wrath of God, stuff like that. So a lot less like Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, it's nice you Condemn in here, which I'll talk through why I'm running Condemn now. And a lot more like 4-man answers for a lot of cards. Due to the printing of a lot of very powerful planeswalkers like Renin 6, due to Oko, you've got Ramanap Excavator, you've got Spellseeker, which finds life from Loam, which is, again, a very hard card to deal with. You've got Force Negation now, but it's a card that comes back every turn and can return Strip Mine Wasteland and just keep on eating your mana base apart. Wasteland has as big of a problem as Strip Mine because, this deck does run a lot of basics. This is a deck that could even run back to basics in it. I think under different build considerations that I've currently got going in this one. Generally, Light and Tutor is a card you want when you're running that because you have one effect that does that in this color pie. So, anyways, before we get ahead of ourselves, kind of talk through like what I've got in front of you and like some of the considerations I put, kind of like looking back at this deck and looking at the archetype as a whole. What is Canadian Highlanders? Canadian Highlanders is a 100-card format that plays on a lot like Constructed Cube. It's unified format, accepting basic lands and any card that enumerates on it specifically that you can run more than one in a deck. Think like Relentless Rats. I think there's a bunch of rats that have it. There may be like 5 cards in Magic's history. I think there's a blue card, 2 black cards, maybe 3 black cards. But there's not a lot of them. 7 dwarves, you can run 7 of those, because it says so on the card. But outside of those cards specifically, you're playing a unified format, so single copies of cards outside of basics. And the most powerful cards over the course of Magic's history have been pointed such that each deck is able to have 10 points in it. And the most powerful ones have points associated with them, and you can have up to 10. So, like, for instance, my deck is running Ancestral Recall, which is a very powerful Magic card. It's 7 points out of 10, so that is, fully 7/10 of the power of the points that I'm able to run in this deck. And the other points that I'm running are Dig Through Time, and Mystical Tutor. Mystical Tutor being 2 points, and Dig Through Time being 1. Otherwise, the rest of the cards are, you could play them in any deck, but you can't play like all the best cards. I couldn't have like Black Lotus, Time Walk, Ancestral Recall in a deck, because Time Walk 6 points, Ancestral 7, Black Lotus is 7. So you are limited in how many of those most powerful cards you can run in a deck. Because frankly, at the end of the day, if you could run all of the points that are out there, all the Mox and all the Black Lotus, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, the decks would look pretty homogenous. So it kind of breeds creativity into the format, and it kind of allows you to explore the history of Magic. So, kind of tying back to the original argument, like our original discussion that we were having about this deck, this is Azorious Control. So it's kind of like, just a big blue control deck. Is really what it is at the end of the day. It plays white at the end of the day just so it can react to the board. So it can either impact the board meaningfully through some sort of proactive line, like, at this point, Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. Could be like Elsbeth Sun's Champion, which I don't have in this deck, but there's Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. It's just a really good planeswalker. Entreat the Angels tends to be the big one. That's why it's called Miracles, because you tend to put this on top of your deck with your Mystical Tutor, which is right here, my 2-point card that's in the deck. Says put a Sorcery Instant on top of your deck. And shuffle your library, put it on top. So you put Entreat on top. Basically, it doesn't become as much of a miracle at that point. You just draw it and, kill them with like 20 power and flyers. Or you can put this Miracle Terminus on top and then, blow up the board. Have one mana to blow up the board and leave up counter magic on the next turn, or do it on their turn. With top tricks, because this is a deck that's running Sensei's Divining Top, which is a card that also helps set these cards up. A lot of cards that help set it up. You have like these weird cards that kind of don't look like they'd be that powerful, like Cast Out, which cycle and allow you to instant speed miracle cards. They're also just mutable. They can become cantrips, which is kind of powerful actually when you start looking at it, even though it's a little overcosted at 4 mana for an Oblivion Ring effect. But you have stuff like that as well. There's a couple cantripping cards that have impacts but cantrip for a low cost. But anyways, this is a deck. It's just a big blue control deck. It has a lot of counter spells in it. To break down the piles, you have the dual lands and fetch lands over here that I'm highlighting right now in the 17 pile. The basics over here. You have utility cards right here with Mystic Sanctuary, Nihil Spellbomb, and Mission Briefing. Although Mission Briefing is a card that I'll kind of talk a bit. It probably should get cut. It's really slow. It's a good card, but I don't know if it's quite where I need to be. This 22 pile is the permission, so that's a ton of permission. 21 pile here is kind of all the cantrip cards. So you have like Irrigated Farmland, which can count as a land. It's a 38 land deck, which is a lot for Canadian Highlander. 37 tends to be like the control benchmark because I'm running some utility lands in this deck. I went up a little bit because this is definitely a deck that needs its lands to function. This next pile here is the board reactive cards. They're basically removal spells for the most part. You have Swords to Plowshares, stuff like that, Condemn. Caracas, I consider this a board impact card. Field of Ruin, Maze of Ith, Wasteland, Blast Zone, all kind of board impacting cards. They're either attacking mana bases or stopping creatures from attacking you or killing things. And then I have my threats here. The cards that I habitually kind of go back to and call threats. One of the things I was talking about with Azorious Miracles is like, and before it was kind of funny, like, talking with some of the folks who play a decent bit of Canadian Highlander, like, they were like, well, with blue-white, it almost feels better just to have, like, almost no win cons, like 1 to 2 win cons. And, like, I was very firmly in that camp of folks. I thought you wanted to have very few win cons in the deck, like Jace the Mind Sculptor, maybe Teferi, or have your win cons serve multiple purposes, which they certainly do in this deck. There's actually more win cons than are shown in this win con pile. If you jump over to this pile, you have Teferi, which is a win con. It's very slow in 100 cards, but it can win a game. And most folks just concede to it if it ultimates. Jace the Mind Sculptor, more realistic win con than Teferi is in this format. You're not going to generally mill folks out by exiling all their lands, and then cycling your Teferi on top of your deck, allowing them to draw, blowing up their land drops every turn, and then eventually they just mill. That's how that loop works. Not mistakes, it can bounce itself. I've never done that in this format. Normally, like I said, if you get this to ultimate, like, they just concede. They probably should too. But anyways, this is just the win cons. So the win cons have definitely upped up. You look at Snapcaster, and this could really go into the utility pile too. But like I said, I was looking at this build, and like I really wanted to make some significant changes to it to make it more viable, to kind of keep its identity as a control deck, but drop its range down a little bit more into mid-range, i.e. increase the threats in it so that I was able to play a more incremental game plan if my resources were denied. Because the biggest concern I have playing a deck like this, like right now in a lot of the games I see, and in like what's probably near the top of the pack as far as strength goes, like these mid-range lands decks. And when I say mid-range lands decks, I mean decks that run Strip Mine, which is a 2-point card right now. Is probably going to go to 3 relatively soon because it needs to. And like Life in the Loam, Renin 6, Ramaneth Excavator, Crucible of Worlds, Wasteland as well. Basically just ways to ensure that opposing mana resources are limited. Which, if you're only playing 1 to 2 win cons, the likelihood of having those win cons, which at that point tend to be more expensive, there's stuff like Elsbeth Sun's Champion, Gideon Jura, Entreat the Angels, those cards require a lot of mana. They require a lot of mana to make work. So your density of them is not very high. So, like, because they require a lot of mana to work, you generally want to run fewer because you don't want to have it in your hand. Generally speaking, you want to develop, and deny on the stack, with counter magic, or with some of your board impacting cards, and then, just drop one of these haymakers. Just, EOT, Miracle, Entreat off cycling, Sensor, or whatever. And, you have 20 power, you attack once, they're dead. That's ideally how you want to play it. Earlier iterations of this deck that I tended to would run like Celestial Colonnade, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Teferi, Entreat the Angels, and that was about it to win with. That was about it. Like, that's all you had to win with. It didn't run like the Nimble Obstructionist, the Brazen Borrow, or the Ventilion Clique. Gideon, Ally of Zendikar is a new add as well. Torrential Gearhulk was a card I wasn't actually high on that build of the deck either. Aven Mind Sensor, none of it. So all of these kind of cards are kind of new. It's kind of a genesis I've gone through to say, like, hey, how does this deck stay relevant in the format? Now, is it the strongest variety of decks kind of like this that you could play? No, I think if you really wanted to play like hard control, which I still think this is a hard control deck, you probably want to go blue-red because you have the ability to directly attack mana bases, opposing mana bases with Blood Moon, Back to Basics, Magus of the Moon. And you also have access to a lot more incremental win conditions. You're not going to tend to have the haymakers that blue-white has, but you're going to have, smaller critters like Thing in the Ice. I mean, you could run Thing in the Ice in this deck too, but I don't tend to like it as much because it's not a card that does a ton. You have to tap out for it for one, and it's not a card that does a ton with in a Wrath of God deck. If you oftentimes I would find I was playing Thing in the Ice, and then I was having to Wrath by turn 5, and it would be flipping around that time, but I mean, I would just have to because if I left anything in play, I guess it bounces it, but still, they'd have haste creatures, stuff like that, and it just wasn't doing its job in the deck. So it's a card I didn't end up putting in this build, but it's a card you could. You could even go further with this and put Baral in this deck. You could put Thing in the Ice in this deck. Right now I'm not running those, but again, when I have 3 Wraths in a deck, I tend to like those sort of creatures a little bit less. Because it's really hard it's hard to rationalize playing a 2-drop creature that you can't play on turn 2, if that makes sense. A turn 3 creature, it's a lot easier to rationalize playing it on 5 and then having 2 mana up to counter their next spell, or counter their next spell and then EOT one of these flash threats. That's another thing you kind of see is they all play at flash speed. But when I have a 2-drop, having to save it until turn 6 after I've expended my resources and they've expended their resources to play it and then leave up a counter spell is fairly underwhelming, and it's not really helping me. It's not doing what it generally would do, which is stop probably 4 to 6 points of damage over the courses of turn 2 to turn 4. Which is really why you'd want Thing in the Ice. Now, when you're in a burn-heavy blue-red deck, it's a lot easier to flip Thing in the Ice, and your board control is going to be a lot more incremental. It's not going to be Supreme Verdicts or Wrath of Gods. It's going to be Arc Trails and Lightning Bolts, which works a lot better in that plan. So that's kind of why I don't have that card. It's why I don't, Baral is not a card I'm running right now in here, mostly because it's such a feels bad against Karakas, and despite having a ton of counter magic, I don't know if it does enough. So that's kind of how I've seen the deck needs to change. It needs to have more incremental ways to win. It needs to have ways to combat, some of the stall that the land destruction decks can wreck on the control heavy, the blue decks like this, the big blue decks like this. Do I think it's a great matchup? No, I still don't think it's very good. I still think it's actually a harsh matchup. But that's kind of the direction I've gone. I don't think you lose a ton doing it. You get more removal. I have more removal in here at this point as well because I think there are just a lot of really great creatures that have been printed recently, so you really just have to be ready for them. And you can't always wait, until turn 4 or 5, to wrath the board. And even if you do, sometimes they'll just drop a Questing Beast right after that, and you just get your eyeballs beaten out. So I'm playing a little bit more removal as well. I have Condemn in here right now. Another card that, I think probably is going to go in over Mission Briefing is going to be on Thin Ice. I'm not running it in this current build, but I haven't been building this heavily. And, honestly, I grabbed an older deck that I had and, made some quick changes to it to play this deck tonight versus Ben Wheeler, who was on a deck that was running a Lance package. A rug deck running a Lance package, and it kind of inspired me just to do a quick video on where I think this archetype is and why I think right now it's kind of struggling, but if it's something that you're very committed and enjoy playing, why you can still play it, because I do think the deck has game against those strategies that intend to deny your mana resources through Strip Mine Recursion. Without, significantly compromising the deck, or utterly changing the deck into a Rest in Peace Helm deck, which is a combination you can run in this deck. I have historically, German Highlander, you can run Rest in Peace plus Helm of Obedience to mill people. And Rest in Peace has some incremental value on its own. I don't tend to be a huge fan of those 2 card combos. And I guess you could say that Mystical Tutor plus Entreat the Angels is kind of a 2-card combo too, but it's a little bit different. Both the halves of that combo do something on their own. Now Entreat not as much. If you have it in your opener, it's pretty bad, or if you draw it when you can't cast it, it's pretty bad. But I have hard casted one. That said, but yeah, so that's kind of where I think the format is. Or where this archetype that I'm kind of discussing right now is in the format, and kind of I think how you have to go with it. I don't think you can expect to just jump in and try to counter every spell with this deck. You have to counter the right ones, but the other problem is there's just so many right ones that there's so many right spells now that there's not, in my opinion, the density of
the density of counter magic has gone down. Apropos the volume of good cards that need to be countered, the need to be countered cards that are out there. Whether it be like the Okos, the Questing Beasts, the Renin Sixes, the opposing Teferi Time Ravelers, you name it. There's just a lot of really good cards. I mean, I'm not naming a lot of Planeswalkers, but it's Planeswalkers and creatures, basically permanent sources of either damage or avalanching card advantage that wins folks games. So that density's gone down, and it's certainly a cost to having to play cards, not having to, but desiring to play cards like Negate and Dovin's Veto in your deck. Like, they are cards that can deal with most of that stuff, like most of those good Planeswalkers, but they're very situational too. Like, sometimes your opponent just goes Goblin Guy turn 1, and you're like, well, this Dovin's Veto and this Negate are not looking great. They'll probably get something in that matchup too. It's not like Red Deck wins doesn't play, spells, but, you're also, in that matchup, you're not looking to sit around and just get beat to death by a Goblin Guy. So yeah, it's in a tough spot with lands being as good as it is. I think lands is definitely a top archetype. And again, like at the end of the day, like I was talking about Goblin Guy, like this deck has always struggled with like red deck wins. So what I found is that like I kind of had to reinvent the deck, take out a little bit of the card draw, which kind of helps smooth out the draws, like some of the Xerox components to the deck, like the card draw components to the deck, and put in a few more ways to actually have board impact. Ideally on cards, that can present a clock, but also have either one operate at flash speed or have some sort of card advantage like effect. And I think when you start looking at the cards that like I'm considering threats, like a lot of them do, like Gideon Ally of Zendikar, probably like one of the least of all. Like Gideon Ally of Zendikar and Entreat the Angels, probably the least of all. They're probably just mostly pure threats. But the rest of these actually have like small effects on them. Like Snapcast, not even a small effect, huge effect. Maybe the best creature ever printed. Even Mind Sensor, can just kill some decks outright. And you get someone's fetch land with this. Feels pretty bad for them. Feels pretty good for you. Also just flies, pressures planeswalkers. Like a lot of these new flying threats were really put in here just to pressure out planeswalkers, and then also just be decent threats. And they are. They're all pretty good cards. Like Nimble Obstruction is just a good 3/1 flash flyer. You can randomly stifle something, which I have done on like Planeswalker Ultimates. Pretty good. Brazen Borrower, again, like, one of the cards that like historically has been played this deck like 3 to 4 years ago, maybe even now for some folks that are just big lovers of it, like Blink of an Eye. Or Into the Royal is the one that used to historically be played, but maybe if you're more familiar with modern cards, Into the Blink of an Eye, it's the same card. This card can do that, except you don't get to draw a card off of it if you pay 4, or if you pay the kicker of 2, blue and 1. But this one on the backswing of the extra card on it is a 3/1 flash flyer, which doesn't block, but the intent of it is to actually present a means of pressure to kind of ride it out and win the game, or as a tool to interact favorably for you, the blue-white player, versus planeswalkers. Vidilian Clique. Yeah, this card actually does have some application in the matchup that I was kind of talking about, like I think is a problem for this deck, and like why I haven't been playing this deck specifically as much, and that's the land style decks, because this can get rid of loam. When they dredge back life from the loam, you just put it on the bottom of their deck. And then ideally it's gone. The thing is, I mean, there's a lot of ways to get it back. I mean, you have stuff like Spellseeker, which can get Loam and Tomb. So, it's probably not gone forever. And if you are familiar with the land strategies, which I'm not going to go like ad nauseum into like how lands decks work, I have a few. Actually, I have a couple decks out there. So if you want, check through my historical videos that I've got up that talk through some of the lands decks that I played. There's a lot of ways to get the cards you need to make the lands engine work, and they've only been increasing. You have like Elvish Reclaimer now, Renin 6, just a lot of them that are out there that really enable that engine to run. So if you get rid of Loam, like it's not like it's gone forever unless you like force some negation it. But Vidilian Clique can do a good job of at least buying you some time, forcing them to use their cards to find it again. And it puts pressure on them. It's a 3/1 flash flyer. Knocks around planeswalkers, knocks around the opponent. Just good. Like I said, Gideon, just a pure threat. Like this card is just, I've played with it and against it enough to know how much pressure it represents. Like, oftentimes someone resolves this thing and I'm tapped and I can't deal with it. It's just game over because it's just so much avalanching advantage for so little input. It's a 7 power, 4 mana spell, basically. I mean, it's a 5/5 the next turn. It makes it 2/2 on the turn it comes in. It's 2 and 5 power split across 2 bodies, and or it's an Anthem, which probably is never going to be in this deck unless it works out in some weird way that like by making an Anthem I can kill them with Angels easier. I don't know. But in general, this card is just it's really good at its job. It's probably one of the best in class at its job. It 4 mana as just a threat planeswalker. To highlight like another way folks have attacked this deck, like Jeremy White, I believe recently put up some good results with a blue-white tap out control deck. So significantly different than this deck. Well, not significantly different. It's still kind of a blue-white deck. It still has counter spells, just not as many. But he played a variant that was running a lot more planeswalkers. Like I think he had Narset in there. I think he had both Narsets. I think he had Narset Parter Veils and like the old school Narset, the blue-white one. Dovin Baan, the 4 mana planeswalker. Sarah the Benevolent. May have had Elsbeth Night Errant in there. Gideon Jura. Like he had a ton of them. Basically, so he's more of a tap out control deck. Less stack interaction. Which I think, you look at that deck, and that deck, to me, is very powerful. I've actually played against it, a couple times, and I think I've won and lost against it about 0.50. I think that style of deck will tend to struggle. It has a higher propensity for getting blued out than this style of deck does. But I think that deck is much better at dealing with... I think that deck's much better at dealing with like the board-based decks, like aggressive decks, possibly the lands decks, because it's on a 2-mox spread. But it's a lot worse versus the combo decks. I think you lose out versus the combo decks and the other blue decks. So really it comes down to what do you want to beat. I think this build tends to be more well-rounded than that build is. But, it's very close, right? Like, it really depends on your metagame and what folks are going to play. But I tend to, for like my Moto decks especially, try to go as matchup neutral as I can on them, because I kind of want them to be able to, allow me options in any matchup that I may face. If I play 20 games against 20 different people, I tend to feel like I could take this and do okay with it. Is it going to be a rock star? No. Maybe if it was 20 people, 20 games, I'd probably take out mission briefing and put in timely reinforcements, because I would expect to play against like 3 to 4 red decks, like hard red decks, like red deck wins. And that matchup's tough, so you kind of want more tools against that. But yeah, so I'm a little bit lower on having that many planeswalkers in the deck. Plus, I'm not on the Moxen spread; I'm on the Ancestral spread over that. But this is definitely the one. Like Gideon Allies in the card is just so good. Like it's the best of those that have that role, that have that function that he was going after in his build. And I'm running it here because, like I said, like you just don't have time to sit around and kind of wait. You'll just get it traded out on your mana base in a lot of the matchups that are out there now. So anyways, guys, I'm not going to cover each card ad nauseum. If you kind of want that, like you can go back and kind of look at my blue-white deck. I'll go over some quick new ads. I'm running Archmage's Charm in here. I'm just testing it out. This is a new ad. Really, the reason I play this card is the last ability. Gain control of target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 1 or less. It is the ability that comes up the least often that you'll use this for, but because it has that ability, and because that ability is back-breaking in the right situations, i.e. stealing Soul Rings, Mana Crypts, Dark Depth, Merit Liege, you name it. There's a lot of, like, Mana Dork, Elvish Reclaimer, Weathered Wayfarer, you name it. There's a lot of stuff that's really relevant in this format that you can steal with this card that is just huge. That really having that highest of upsides is what rationalizes playing a 3 blue mana, basically counterspell in this deck, or a 3 blue mana divination. Because neither of those effects are worth 3 blue. The flexibility this card represents is big, though. But really, it's the flexibility plus like that power boost, like that steal anything that's 1 or less. That sold me on it, and I've been very happy with it. It's a tougher card to cast, but this is primarily a blue deck. It's basically blue, 70% blue, 30% white, just to control the board and to actually win the game is the only reason it's running the white. All right, some other new cards that are in the deck. I'm going with Pact of Negation because I do have more threats now. A lot of them play at flash speed, but I want the ability to like tap out for a Gideon Allies in the card, Jace the Mind Sculptor, and just have the Pact be like, nope, not happening, bud. I also have like Teferi, Time Raveler, like just a few more walkers, a few more threats, a few more like tap on things. Actually, I'm running more Wraths now, so I have like Wrath of God in here as well. So having this ability is kind of nice. It's not a new card, but it's a card that is new to me running it. I've been running it recently. Dovin's Veto, new card of this build. Yeah, I mean it's another negate. It can't be countered, which makes it's relevant in some matchups. All right, Teferi Time Raveler. I don't think I need to talk about how busted this card is. It's new to this build. I don't think I've been running it for months, but I don't think when I covered this deck last I was running it. This card is just a good board impacting card that cycles itself, and or can have relevance in making Supreme Verdict or Wrath of God or maybe Terminus instant speed, which is kind of nice. I think I've also randomly hardcast and Treat the Angels at instant speed with this card as well. Now Spellbomb. I think the oldest version had this card in it. I'm back to running it again. I think you need to run this card. Because, decks like Storm, this deck can struggle with. And then the lands decks. I think Storm's easier than lands. The lands decks are just so rough. Like, you just don't have great tools to deal with that sort of recursive, attritional advantage that they represent when they get going. You need something like this. All right, Mystic Sanctuary, also a new add. Yeah, the card just slaps. Got a bunch of fetches. You find this thing, put a recall back on top, put a counter spell back on top, put a not a Jace, I'm sorry, just, put something that you need back on top. Card's just very, very good. It could even be an Entreat the Angels if you discard it early. Who knows? Alright, other new cards. I don't think there are many other new cards that I've added to the decks. Instead, I'm on a Maze of Ith and Korhaven spread right now. So, actually, where is Korhaven? It should be over here in the utility lands. There we go, or on the kill lands. So, I've got Maze of Ith and Korhaven. So, the last build I was running this, I think it was on 37 lands. It may have been on 38 when I covered it on video, but it went down to 37. I've gone back up to 38 because I found that that I needed more board impacting cards, and Maze of Ith is just really good at its job, and so is Korhaven. Korhaven also produces mana as well, which is kind of nice, so they are both new adds. Blast Zone may also be a new add from the last time I covered this, as well as Field of Ruin. Field of Ruin is stellar. Blast Zone, hit or miss. It really is hit or miss, but it's pretty free in the deck. And then I think that's about it, guys. I mean, then I've covered all the threats. Wrath of God is back in. I haven't, the card I was running before was, so I had a Mystical Teachings package in here, and I was running Settle the Wreckage for a while. And, Settle the Wreckage just, it wasn't settling for me. I wasn't too happy with it. It just, it was too hit or miss. And, early on it was really great because folks just didn't play around it at all. And then, folks, started kind of getting wise to it. They're like, oh, you're on blue-white. And you'll think, man, you have to Settle the Wreckage. And sometimes you did have it and it would be painful. And sometimes you didn't have it and they wouldn't get as much damage in. But, oftentimes I just found, Wrath of God was just better, because I needed to deal with their board. Now, Settle the Wreckage did deal with man lands, or creature lands, I'm sorry. So, a couple of things I've added, because creature lands do tend to be an issue for this deck, is, you've always had, the Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile. Condemn, I put back in, because I think this card is, it's actually pretty powerful, and, dealing with creature lands tends to be a problem for this deck, because it doesn't have a ton of LD. It has, Wasteland and Field of Ruin. But Maze of Ith, Korhaven, got back in just to kind of deal with that, because I didn't have the Settle the Wreckage to kind of deal with those threats that got away from you. But yeah, this is blue-white control. Those are some of the changes. Oh yeah, Force of Negation too. Force of Negation got in there. Yep, this is a great card from Modern Masters, Modern Horizons. So yeah, this is where the deck is at right now, guys. A couple changes to it from the last time I showcased it. It's definitely gotten more mid-rangey. It has more of a threat base built into it, but I like to think that a lot of the threat base also maintains. They have dual purpose into the disruption, onto the disruption half of the deck as well. So I don't feel like I've lost a ton of capability and being able to disrupt things. Closest card to the chopping block, again, Mission Briefing. I think I would cut it and put on Thin Ice in the deck, and or another threat. I haven't fleshed out what threat that would be, but there's probably another threat that could be in this deck. Maybe another Walker, maybe a Narset. Narset's very powerful. But yeah, that's the deck, guys. I'm going to go on a quick pause. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but if you watch to this point, generally go down to my comments if you want to see if there's a timestamp for just gameplay. I'm only going to be showcasing one game today. It'll be against Ben Wheeler, so at least it'll be a good one. Ben's a great player. I'll be playing against Rug with this build. So quick pause, guys. I'll be back momentarily with the game. Oh, hey guys, I guess I didn't unpause this. Give me 1 second, let me reset here. I just talked through this game, and luckily it's a very short one. All right, now I think I'm back. So this first one is a very short game. Opponents on the play. This is Ben here. He gambles for likely either Life in the Loam or Strip Mine. So my assumption is I'm probably dead here because he kind of has a hand that's very tough for this deck to beat. I have a tap land on turn 1 into an untapped Glacial Chasm to leave up Mana Leak. Unfortunately, opponent has the Strip Mine. I have a tapped land. They can't Strip Mine next turn because they're going to have to play a land, then Life in the Loam to Strip Mine back. But, which gives me the opportunity to possibly, like, draw land, and maybe get out of this. Because they'd have to continue to loam, and not be presenting pressure. But because it's so early in the game, and I have so few mana resources available to me right now, in hand, plus means of pressuring them effectively, I'm just going to pack it in. If this happens later in the game, after you have like 3 to 4 land drops, like, you tend to be a lot better off. But if it happens like right now, like, it's just, you won't play a game of Magic. It's over. So I go ahead and pack it in here on turn 2, just to save time for everyone. And like I said, like, if they, like, Ben had kind of like the Stone Nuts hand against my deck in this matchup. He had a very good hand. And it's one of those hands that, like, I was talking to him about it before because actually I asked him, like, hey, what do you want to play against? He said blue-white. I'm like, all right, well, if you get the lands draw on the deck you're playing tonight, like, it's going to be tough. Like, it may not be a good game. And this kind of showcases, like, one of the possibilities, one of the frailties of, like, this general strategy of blue-white strategy right now. Now, that said, like, do I think that, like, Ben's opening hand is, like, vastly unfair? No, I think, if I was on a red deck and I played, like, turn 1 Goblin Guide into turn 2 1-drop, like, it becomes a lot to our turn 2 2-drop. 1-drop. This line of play, this hand, likely has a lot more liabilities on his end. But it's kind of one of the things that can happen in Canadian Highlander 2, right? It's a very diverse, very wide format, and, sometimes you can just be in a matchup where you're going to have some significant liabilities, which I would say this is that matchup. Now, like I was kind of talking through in the beginning, like, I have built the deck such that I think it gives it better percents against this style of deck, against the mid-range lands decks. But I still don't think it's great. Like, if they have this sort of hand, like, you're just like, all right, I have to have Force Negation or I lose the game, more than likely. I have to Force Negate this Life in the Loam or I'm just done, And here, I didn't have it, so I do think it was justifiable keep. It wanted to draw land over this cast out. It was a 2-land hand, which is not the best, but, it had a turn 2 Mana Leak. It had a threat, had some board control, had counterspell. So, not a bad hand, but, like, it's not going to beat this sort of start, and it's not going to come back from it either. So, we go to game 2, which I promise is a far more interesting and interactive game than this one is. Alright, guys, back. So, this hand's fine. It's got lands, it's got counterspells, it's got a threat, it's got some card draw, got a little bit of everything going on. OP goes turn 1 Ponder. Seems good. Mystic Sanctuary not its best here, but I'm going to play it out because I don't think that I'd rather play my tap land down on turn 1. This is actually also a landed hand, so if they wasteland me, I don't really care on turn 1. That's a good draw right there. Ancestral Recall tends to be one you want to see. This hand's shaping up pretty well. Like, I've got, still some counter magic left. I've got great card draw. Just go ahead and opt here. Find Force of Negation. OP, Ben here has Vendilion Clique, goes ahead and gets rid of my Jace, which is the best card in my hand. I'll find the Disallow here. Go ahead and fetch with Disallow, or with my land. Now, the plan here, I actually ditch a land here. I don't know if I should have ditched the Field of Ruin. The Field of Ruin's still got to be right to keep. Just because with, like, the Aven Mindsetzer, I can actually, like, probably kill one of his lands. I could have opted to block there. Go ahead and counter that. They play an Excavator out. I just go ahead and play my most expensive counterspell than counter it. I'd rather keep counterspell as hidden information. And also, if I draw something like Teferi, it's easier to cast a counterspell. Go ahead and drop this Teferi down. Draw a card. Untap 2 lands. EOT. I believe I untap the Tundra and the Isle in the basic. Oh, I don't. Untap. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, because I'd rather not have my Tundra wastelanded. And they'll probably, if they have a wasteland, they'll probably wasteland the open blue mana to resolve a spell. Or Strip Mine. I go ahead and counter the Crucible here. They hit the Teferi down. That could have been a little bit aggressive on the negate, but I felt like if they're going to commit 3 mana when they're this low, like, it's not likely they have a way to deal with Teferi. I was wrong. I had to force negation the Bull here because I want to keep Teferi around and have access to the Aven Mindsetzer to block with. I do go ahead and just play my Aven Mindster EOT out here, so I can untap 2 lands, actually get use out of that 2 mana that Teferi makes. I won't be able to cast my Torrential Gearhulk, but I do kind of want to block this Vendilion Clique, and then also have access through my Snapcaster Mage to mana to disallow, anything that's board impacting. Really. They're down to 1 card, so I'm feeling like I'm in a pretty good spot here because I have a follow-up Torrential Gearhulk with an onboard card engine, and board impacting card. Like, Teferi can just kill things. So we see a Raging Ravine, which I guess kind of vindicates my decision to, keep the Field of Ruin over the Polluted Delta there when I had to discard. See Faithless Looting, I could counter that, but no need to. They play on a Spellseeker. I probably should have just waited on this, but I kind of wanted to just have them concede here. The right play is to play Torrential Gearhulk out after they find what they're going to find off Spellseeker, so they don't find like an Abrade to kill this Torrential Gearhulk. But I was just like, hey, bud, I've got a 5/6. I can Ancestral Recall here. You're probably not going to beat that from 0 cards, and Ben tends to agree and goes ahead and concedes the game, so we go to game 2. But again, the right play is, do it EOT or after the Seeker's at least resolved and found what it's going to find, because you don't want him to find a Braid. You kind of want this to stick around. I was kind of hoping to snipe this Raging Ravine, have him fire it up, and then try to get in there and kill this Teferi. That's why I attacked. I mean, Ben's a good player. He's pretty smart. He also recognizes that I'm a fairly cagey player too, and if I couldn't have dealt with the Raging Ravine, which I could have because I had open mana for Field of Ruin as well. I wouldn't have attacked there. But it's a pretty free attack because I still have this Field of Ruin up. But it could also be he draws another land. He just wants me to get the Field of Ruin off the table, and he attacks, and then I can just eat it for free with the Torrential Gearhulk, which is pretty nice. But either way, the plan worked out here. They didn't have really the lands package going on. They had some landsy cards. They had Ramunap Excavator and Crucible of Worlds, both of which I countered. But didn't have the Strip Mine recursion, the Wasteland recursion going on, where I just can't really establish a good basis of mana. And I feel like if that's the axis along which their deck attacks, that my deck is going to most struggle with, because this style of deck, blue-white and blue-red, really needs its lands. It's looking to 2 spell with 6 mana spell into 2 mana spell. So having up to 7 to 8 lands is not a big deal. It's not uncommon. It's also why you play 38. I mean, given one of them is not really a land. Mace of It's not really a land, but it really is, but it's really not. It's really kind of a 37 land deck with the Mace of It in it to be 38. But at the end of the day, when they're attacking along that axis, it's very, very tough. So that's why I conceded game 1, and then here, you can see we just managed to not hit that part of their deck and have a game that was a little easier to navigate and win. Anyways, guys, very interesting game for game 3. Hope you're still sticking around for it, because game 3 is actually the kind of the cool one that happens in this matchup. So quick pause, be right back. All right, guys, we're back. All right, this hand's perfectly acceptable. It's got a Spell Pierce. It's got, a Wasteland, which is not great in this matchup, but it's fine. Got a Korhaven, slow. Really what ties together is having the Spell Pierce, Remand, and Search for Azorious and just castable cards. So we see turn 1 Mana Dork, Deathrite Shaman, which is actually not one that is as frightening in this matchup as it is in others, because they can't activate it to actually kill me. But what is frightening is this Oko, and I'm very glad that I have a Spell Pierce to counter Oko, because it probably would have ended the game. There's a consideration to remanding this, but if they're just sacking a land in hand, then they kind of get me. And they also know that I have to fetch there if I want to counter, and I don't really want to fetch to give them a land drop if they don't have it. Draw to a Memory Lapse. Fine draw. Very fine draw. That's why I let the Ice Fang Quotal resolve. And really, they don't have a great clock on me. They're just doing 2 a turn here. So I drew to land, and they're trying to play this Expedition map out. I go ahead and counter it. If they fetch, they lose it. So they evidently didn't care about losing it, which I think this may be an error on Ben's part here. I'm going to quick pause. I think what I kind of like doing there, they have the Life from the Loam already in hand. I kind of like leaving the Expedition map on top so that they can get the Strip Mine recursion going there. I don't know. That may have been a hasty line on their part. I don't know. It's close. I could have also set up an earlier tide if I wanted to fetch, but again, I just don't want to give them mana resources off of their Deathrite Shaman. So I'm not really keen on putting lands in my graveyard yet until I have to. They go to their 4th land, play on a Huntmaster of the Fells. I go ahead and fetch at this point, find a Prairie Stream, go ahead and remand this to get to my next card, which is a Condemn, which is a way to deal with the Huntmaster if I need to. I believe I see Dovin's Veto, pitch it, not really great here. Find Ancestral Recall is very great. So I don't have a counter spell in hand for starters. I mean, I could Ancestral Recall into one. But what I want to do here is actually I think their hand's 4 cards. We don't know what they're drawing yet, so their hand's 4 cards. They have a way to deal with the Jace. One of the things you come and see against red decks is that I'll plus Jace. Here it wouldn't have mattered because they could do 2 to it plus bolt it anyways. If I put it to 5, so I figure hey, have it. I also think that the most likely line of play is they replay out the Huntmaster, which I can then Supreme Verdict. Unfortunately, they have Natural Order, which is horrendous because they have Life from the Loam, and this Primeval Titan, which we're pretty positive they're going to find, is going to find Wasteland and Strip Mine, which is pretty savagely bad for me. I think at this point I say good game, I'm probably dead. I blow up the board here. I could have gone for a Torrential Gearhulk and Ancestral Recall, but that to me is the wrong line because they already have a 6/6 in play that's going to get them 2 more lands, and the Torrential Gearhulk does not favorably block the Titan. I do kind of get a land back off of Search for Escanta. I'm able to Ancestral Recall here off of the Snapcaster Mage. But in the interim, after kind of demolishing their board, they have found a Sylvan Library. So the scary thing about having both Wasteland and Strip Mine available to them is that they only have to Life from the Loam every other turn. One of the interesting things that you'll find with Life from the Loam is that if someone's on a Loam engine, like a Loam lock, their hand will tend to actually kind of suck. They'll have just a ton of lands in it. The problem that I'm in right now, the pickle that I'm in, is that they have both Wasteland and Strip Mine, so they only need to Life from the Loam every other turn, which means they're only missing every other turn's draw step. And now they have a Sylvan Library, which is going to kind of help abate the issue that Life from the Loam runs into, which is that you have these 7-card hands, 8-card hands, so you're discarding hand size, but it's just a bunch of fetch lands, and then a Strip Mine and Wasteland that you're just loaming back every turn. So what I'm trying to do right now is trying to just continue to make land drops every turn, so they're forced to do that. And ideally, I'm drawing into threats. They're drawing into nothing because they're missing draw steps off of the Loam. But right now, the Sylvan Library is kind of breaking that paradigm, that hope that I have. And then what am I looking to do? I'm looking to kind of hopefully they're continuing to have to commit to that plan. And I'm able to drop, a Jason Mind Sculptor, Gideon Ally of Zendikar, a Teferi Time Raveler, a Vendilion Click. Whatever. I need to present pressure now because my resources are just going to be denied the whole game. Unless they mill themselves, which is not very likely. I just find 2 planes here. I find 2 I don't find what is the one I normally find? Irrigated Farmland to cycle it. I just find 2 cards that cast my spells. I discard the Torrential Gearhulk because I'm never going to get to that much mana. They play out the Huntmaster again and blow up my Mystic Gate. Go ahead and attack. I just block here. I feel so this block's interesting to me, right? I feel like you want to block here because when they're doing this, when the lands deck is doing the Loam engine, the engine thing without a fast bond or exploration in play, they're not developing their mana either. So taking them off of mana makes a lot of their top decks not that live. So if they have a 5-mana Titania or something like that, now they can't cast it without not denying my mana, which increases my options. So it puts them in an interesting spot where now that we've dealt with, or at least put back in their hand, and they weren't able to recast the Sylvan Library, now they're kind of put in a spot where they can loam to get back this Wasteland, the Strip Mine they're going to use next turn, or they can take a draw step. But if they're loaming, they're not taking a draw step, so they're not going to get gas threats to put on board, and they're not going to be developing their mana base if they're just blowing up my lands, right? Now, over time, I'm not saying that's not powerful, but over time, if I didn't have multiple Ancestral Recalls here, what's going to end up being multiple Tithes, I would generally just run out of lands, and they would not run out of lands, and they would just start taking draws for the turn, and it'd basically be Time Walk. But it doesn't spin up that fast, right? If I'm able to kind of see this many cards, this volume of cards, which is one of the strengths of my deck, the deck that I'm running, is that I can see a lot of cards. And I'm able to make these land drops, then we kind of stay at mana parity is what happens, because they're losing a land to have me lose a land, right? So unlike game number 1 where they had the engine set up by turn 2, which is just a hell of a draw, they had the engine set up a lot later by turn 4 or turn 5 here, and I'm able to basically have up to 4 to 5 mana. So it makes it a lot more feasible for me to win. All right. Anyways, back to the game. Cast out. I just get rid of this thing right now because I figure again their threat density is going to be lower in hand because they've been using Loam a bunch, and they replay out the Sylvan Library. Go ahead and play out my island here. Plan here is to either cast Fact or Fiction if like they just don't like blow up my lands. If they blow up my lands, I'm probably going to cycle Hieroglyphic Illumination and then cast the Aven Mind Sensor, so I can actually get a threat on them. And or Mission Briefing to find. Actually, I'm sorry. This turn I'm going to Mission Brief to Tithe. I do make a misplay this turn, so I misplay this turn this way. I knew I had as soon as I did it too. It was a sequence. It was a Moto thing. I haven't been playing Moto in a while, and I was like, oops. So I should have waited for the Strip Mine to resolve. So I was down on lands, and I could have gotten 2 planes. I did not. Made a mistake. It happens. But I would have an extra planes in hand right now, be it 7 cards, which is better, obviously. So the plan this turn is to basically leave up Aven Mind Sensor and Hieroglyphic Illumination, and or go for the Fact or Fiction. They play out the mine, attack me. You got me down to 6. Another thing I think Ben maybe could have done is actually attacked my white mana. I think my white mana is more dangerous than my blue mana at this point, because the way I ostensibly win this game is through, I think, white mana, actually. Alright, so this is where I drop a Gideon Ally of Zendikar, make a 2-2. And the way this game's played out, I think unless the Sylvan Library finds something relevant, I don't think Ben's hand's that great. Because he's been loaming a lot, and he hasn't been putting a lot of pressure on me. And he goes ahead and ponders and just concedes the game. So, what do we take out of these matchups? Well, one of the things you can take out is that, like, I think blue-white is still viable. I think that can be shown in a lot of ways. I think Jer White has shown, like, a good board, like a tap-out blue-white deck. I think this is a fairly good version of a non-tap-out variety. It has some more tap-out elements to it. But, I think in the current, Canadian Highlander metagame, like, it pays to be proactive. It's kind of hard to be reactive. And a lot of that ties into like the development of the game in general. Like there's a lot of Okos and stuff like that now. 2019 I think has been a groan fest for a lot of folks. And like I don't try to groan about it. I mean, does it tire me out a bit? Do I kind of get under and over the game a bit when like it's just all about having like that turn 2 haymaker? Yeah, I mean it's not the most interesting Magic because it's just like, do I resolve this? All right, if I resolve it, can you deal with it? Nope, I win. And someone could say that like, Magic's been that way forever, or like aggro strategies tend to, have less decisions over the course of a game. Now, given they're pretty relevant decisions, but they also tie into a lot of different resources. Like multiple different resources spread out over multiple different cards. So there's just a lot more that has to go right for them, as opposed to like slamming like some of these like just turn 2, turn 3 haymaker, threats that are available now. So it challenges decks like this to stay current, stay relevant. And on top of that, the menace of having these very strong Lands Engine type cards that have access to a lot of cards that have been printed, frankly, over the last 2 years, to kind of augment some of the older ones like Crucible of Worlds and Life in the Loam, that have more of those effects now with, stuff like Ren and 6, stuff like Remnant Excavator. It can be challenging because, as someone who wants to pilot a deck like this, you have to be cognizant of the fact that there is probably a tier 1 archetype that frankly ranges a lot of different colors, but it's basically 3 to 4 color lands, tier 1 archetype, and then there's just a lot of really strong cards that the continued development of Magic has kind of shown that it wants the game, WotC wants it to go in that direction. And be a little bit less reactive. So it's a challenging thing to do, I think, because you're trying to play against the continued development of the game and also against some of these stronger decks that are currently in the format. Now that said, I think Strip Mine is going to probably go up to 3. Do I think that changes the lands decks that much? I don't know. Probably not. I mean, like folks were like Crop Rot, talking about Crop Rot going from 0 to 1. And like saying that would change things. I still play it. Like it's still a really good card. It's worth a point. Like Crop Rotation is definitely worth a point. Strip Mine definitely worth 2. I think it's probably still worth it at 3. I think it could go to 3. What do I else think could happen to like maybe like make reactive decks a little more viable? Like maybe unpointing some of the low end like the 1-point blue cards like Intuition, Merchant Scroll. Maybe Mana Drain. Mana Drain's a little more iffy, but like I think you could maybe unpoint those and like maybe see a reemergence of like this style of deck. But at the end of the day, like I think this deck's always been like not always, but now like just with its current development, it's just going to continue to be in a tough spot because it's just not where Magic's going. And it's also a very wide format. Like there's just so many ways you can kill a person in this format there's so many decks in the format that just kind of attack along different axes that it's tough to build an optimized, right, like quote unquote control deck, because control decks by nature are meta decks. They're intended to defeat a specific meta, And I think this version, has is fairly neutral bias in how it's built. It is tuned to have some game against those like style of land decks. It's a little more proactive than it historically has been with cards like Gideon Ally of Zendikar, and yeah, I mean it can do it. It's tough. But anyways, I kind of wanted to cover this deck again. I had someone ask me if I was going to do another video soon. I was like, maybe December, and I was like, maybe I should just do one today. Maybe I'll just do one today, put one out there because someone had asked me about it, and I was like, I do these to try to offer, suggestions on the format, and if and I won't lie, like I tend to be someone who enjoys playing blue decks, but there's a widespread of a variety of decks that I put up, on my YouTube page. So hopefully, if you're more of a controlling player, this piques your interest or helps spark some creativity in your own build, to help continue to play it in the metagame as it stands, and kind of against the flow of development as it stands, because it's not going to get easier over time. I hate to tell you, because yeah, I mean, you just look at kind of how the game's gone. It's just we've kind of gotten away from the reactive cards. There's still good reactive cards, but there's a little bit less of them than there are cards that just kill folks, like best of one cards. I guess is what I'll call them. Like just best of one cards. Yeah, they're powerful. Anyways, guys, enjoy and take care now.